My name is Jessica, and at 24, I never thought I'd be sharing my life story on Reddit. But after everything that's happened, I feel like I need to tell someone about how my stepfather's family systematically destroyed my future, and how one phone call changed everything. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or had people steal what was rightfully yours, this story might resonate with you. Before I dive into the details, let me know in the comments where you're reading from, and hit that upvote if you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in what seemed like a perfect middle-class family. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where kids rode bikes without helmets and parents knew each other's names. My mom, Rebecca, was a high school English teacher at Lincoln High School who could make Shakespeare sound like the most exciting adventure story you'd ever heard. She had this infectious laugh that could fill our entire house, and she made the best chocolate chip pancakes every Saturday morning, always cut into heart shapes for special occasions. My dad, Michael, worked as an accountant for Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized firm downtown in one of those old brick buildings that made Portland feel both historic and modern. He wasn't flashy or dramatic, but he was steady, reliable, and completely devoted to our family. Dad had this ritual where he'd come home every evening at exactly 6:15 p.m, hang his jacket on the same hook, and ask about our days while Mom finished dinner preparations. Our house was a modest 3-bedroom craftsman in the Hawthorne district, and with a front porch where we'd sit on summer evenings watching neighbours walk their dogs and kids play street hockey until dark. The house had character: creaky wooden floors, built-in bookshelves, and windows that let in perfect morning light. My bedroom was painted soft yellow because I couldn't decide between pink and blue when I was 7, and Dad said yellow was perfect for someone who couldn't make up her mind. He built me a reading nook by the window with cushions Mom had sewn, where I spent countless hours with books, dreaming about all the places I'd go and things I'd do when I grew up. What made our family special wasn't money or fancy things, but the traditions we created together. Every Friday was pizza and movie night, with each of us taking turns choosing the film. Mom would make her famous brownies. The recipe came from her own grandmother, and we'd argue good-naturedly about whether to watch comedies or action movies. Dad usually lost these debates but never seemed to mind, often falling asleep during romantic comedies while Mom and I shared knowing looks. Christmas mornings were magical productions with homemade stockings Mom sewed herself, each one unique and personal. Dad's elaborate treasure hunts for our presents would span the entire house, with riddles that got progressively more difficult as I got older. Easter meant egg hunts in the backyard and Mom's famous carrot cake. 4th of July involved Dad's slightly dangerous fireworks displays and Mom's patriotic potato salad that the neighbours always requested for community barbecues. My parents had met in college at University of Oregon, both studying education before Dad switched to accounting. They saved carefully for my future from the day I was born, opening a college savings account and contributing to it religiously, often sacrificing their own wants to build what they called my dream fund. Dad would show me the statements sometimes, explaining how compound interest worked and how the money was growing for my education. Knowledge is the one investment that always pays dividends, he'd say, pointing to the growing numbers on the quarterly reports. This money represents opportunities, Jess, doors that will open for you that might not open for others. I had loving grandparents on both sides who spoiled me appropriately. Dad's parents, Grandpa Robert and Grandma Helen, lived in a retirement community in Bend and sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and books they thought I'd enjoy. They'd visit every few months and Grandpa would teach me card games while Grandma helped Mom in the kitchen, sharing family recipes and stories about Dad's childhood mischief. But Grandma Patricia, my mom's mother, was particularly special to me. She lived in a beautiful Victorian house in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood that smelled like lavender and old books. The house was a testament to her success. 3 stories of restored elegance with period furniture, stained glass windows, and a garden that looked like something from a magazine. Grandma Patricia had been a successful real estate investor in her younger years and had accumulated considerable wealth through smart property investments during Seattle's tech boom. She would tell me stories about buying run-down houses in neighborhoods everyone else had written off, then transforming them into beautiful homes. I could see potential where others saw only problems, she'd explain, showing me before and after photos of her projects. She always emphasized the importance of financial independence for women, sharing stories about women she'd known who'd been trapped in bad situations because they didn't have their own money. Every summer, I'd spend 2 weeks with Grandma Patricia, learning to garden, bake her famous lavender shortbread cookies, and listen to her tales of adventure from when she traveled across Europe in her 20s. She had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world, asking detailed questions about my school projects, my friends, and my dreams for the future. Grandma Patricia often spoke about how proud she was of my academic achievements and how she knew I'd accomplished great things in college. Her house was filled with treasures from her travels, hand-painted pottery from Italy, silk scarves from France, and books in languages I couldn't read. She'd let me try on her vintage jewellery and tell me the stories behind each piece. "This ring," she'd say, pointing to an emerald surrounded by small diamonds, "I bought for myself when I closed my first major real estate deal. Never wait for someone else to give you beautiful things, Jessica. You can give them to yourself." Our extended family was close-knit as Paul the Tortoise. Holiday gatherings at various relatives' houses were loud, chaotic affairs with cousins playing board games while adults debated politics and shared embarrassing childhood stories. Mom had 2 siblings, my Uncle James, who worked for Nike and always brought the latest gear for all the kids, and Aunt Sarah, who was a nurse and seemed to know exactly what to do when anyone got sick or hurt. Dad's family was smaller, but equally warm. His younger sister, Aunt Michelle, was a teacher like Mom and would bring art supplies for elaborate craft projects that usually ended with glitter embedded in the carpet for weeks. I felt completely secure in my place within this network of love and support, never imagining how quickly it could all disappear. The signs that something was wrong started gradually. Everything began to unravel when I was 14 and a freshman at Franklin High School. Mom started experiencing severe fatigue and frequent headaches that she initially attributed to stress from teaching, particularly challenging classes that year. She'd come home exhausted, sometimes forgetting to start dinner or falling asleep while grading papers at the kitchen table. At first, we all assumed it was just the normal stress of teaching. Mom had always been the type to push herself hard, staying late to help struggling students or spending weekends creating elaborate lesson plans. But the symptoms persisted and worsened. She started forgetting things, appointments, names of long-time colleagues, even some of my friends' names. Her handwriting, once neat and precise, became shaky and difficult to read. When the symptoms persisted for months, Dad finally convinced her to see a doctor. I remember sitting in the waiting room at OHSU Hospital while Mom underwent a series of tests, MRIs, blood work, neurological examinations. The waiting was torture. Dad kept checking his watch and reading the same magazine page over and over while I pretended to do homework, but actually just stared at the same math problem for an hour. The diagnosis came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March. Multiple sclerosis, a phrase that would reshape our entire family's future. The neurologist, Dr. Martinez, explained the disease with careful precision, using terms like autoimmune disorder and myelin sheath degradation that sounded like a foreign language. MS is an unpredictable disease, he explained, and Mom's case appeared to be the relapsing remitting type, which meant she'd have periods of stability followed by flare-ups of symptoms. The news hit our family like a devastating earthquake. I remember Mom crying quietly in the car on the way home, not the loud sobbing you see in movies, but these silent tears that somehow seemed worse. Dad gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, and I sat in the back seat feeling like the world had tilted off its axis. Mom's case progressed more rapidly than anyone expected. Within a year, she needed a walker for stability, and her teaching career became impossible to maintain. The school district was understanding and offered accommodations, but Mom's cognitive symptoms made it difficult for her to manage the complex demands of teaching high school English. She took early retirement, a decision that broke her heart, but became necessary when she could no longer reliably grade papers or remember lesson plans. The medical bills started mounting despite our insurance. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, medications that cost hundreds of dollars per month, equipment to make our house more accessible. The expenses seemed endless. Dad began working overtime whenever possible, taking on additional clients during tax season and picking up weekend work to cover the costs while also becoming Mom's primary caregiver. Our insurance covered some treatments, but not others. The newest medications, which offered the best hope for slowing Mom's progression, required prior authorization that often took weeks to obtain. Some promising treatments weren't covered at all. Dad spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, his voice growing more strained and frustrated with each conversation. Watching my vibrant, energetic mother struggle with basic tasks was heartbreaking. Some days were better than others, but the overall trajectory was clear. Simple things like buttoning shirts, opening jars, or walking to the mailbox became monumental challenges. Mom tried to maintain her independence as long as possible, but gradually she needed help with more and more daily activities. Dad hired a part-time aide, Mrs. Chen, to help during the day while he was at work and I was at school. Mrs. Chen was a kind woman in her 50s who had experience with MS patients, but even with her help, evenings and weekends fell entirely to Dad. I tried to help as much as possible, learning to prepare simple meals and assist Mom with tasks that had once been effortless for her. The financial strain was enormous. Dad's salary had always covered our basic needs comfortably, but the medical expenses, equipment costs, and home modifications necessary for Mom's mobility quickly depleted their savings. We installed grab bars in the bathroom, bought a hospital bed for the living room when stairs became too difficult, and purchased a wheelchair for bad days. Each modification was a reminder of how much our lives had changed. I overheard countless late-night conversations about money, insurance claims, and difficult decisions about Mom's care. Dad would sit at the kitchen table after Mom had gone to sleep, surrounded by medical bills and insurance forms, his head in his hands. The college fund they'd worked so hard to build was gradually being consumed by immediate medical necessities, a decision that tortured Dad but was absolutely necessary for Mom's care. "We'll figure something out for college," Dad would tell me when I found him looking at the depleted account statements. "Maybe scholarships, student loans. The important thing right now is taking care of Mom." I could see the guilt in his eyes, knowing he was watching my future disappear along with their savings. Despite these overwhelming challenges, we remained close as a family. Mom's illness taught us to appreciate small moments and daily kindnesses in ways we'd never had to before. Dad would carry Mom to the front porch on good days so she could enjoy the sunshine and watch the neighborhood activity. We'd set up a comfortable chair with cushions and blankets, and she'd spend hours there with a book or just observing the world going by. I'd read to her in the evenings, sometimes homework assignments, sometimes novels we both enjoyed. We discussed books and current events just like we always had, and these conversations became even more precious because we never knew when Mom's cognitive symptoms might make them impossible. On her clearest days, she was still completely herself, sharp and funny and wise. The disease affected different aspects of Mom's functioning unpredictably. Some days her physical symptoms were worse: weakness, tremors, difficulty with coordination. Other days the cognitive effects dominated: confusion, memory problems, difficulty finding words. The uncertainty was almost as challenging as the symptoms themselves. We learned to be flexible, to have backup plans for everything, to celebrate good days without taking them for granted. Our social life changed dramatically. Friends and extended family meant well, but many didn't know how to handle Mom's condition. Some visitors were uncomfortable with her mobility challenges or confused by her cognitive symptoms. Others offered help but didn't follow through, leaving us more isolated than before. Gradually, our world shrank to just our immediate family and a few close friends who stuck by us through everything. Mom lived for 3 more years after her diagnosis, fighting the disease with characteristic determination and grace. She had periods of relative stability, alternating with relapses that left her weaker each time. Her final year was particularly difficult as the disease progressed to affect her speech and swallowing, making communication increasingly challenging. Her final months were spent mostly in bed, with hospice care helping to manage her symptoms and keep her comfortable. The house filled with medical equipment, oxygen tanks, IV poles, hospital beds that transformed our living room into a makeshift medical facility. But we made it as homey as possible with family photos, her favourite flowers from the garden, and music playing softly in the background. The night she died, she held my hand and made me promise to pursue my dreams no matter what obstacles I encountered. Her speech was laboured by then, but she managed to whisper the words that would sustain me through the dark years ahead. "Don't let anyone convince you that you're not capable of extraordinary things, Jessica. You have strength you don't even know about yet." Mom died on a quiet Sunday morning in April, with cherry blossoms blooming outside her window. Dad and I were both with her, holding her hands as she passed peacefully in her sleep. The hospice nurse was gentle and respectful, helping us understand what was happening and what needed to happen next. But nothing really prepares you for the moment when someone you love stops breathing. Dad was completely devastated by Mom's death. For months afterward, he moved through our house like a ghost, going through the motions of daily life, but clearly struggling with profound grief. He'd sit in Mom's chair on the front porch for hours, staring at nothing. He'd start to call her name when he came home from work, then catch himself with a look of such pain that it broke my heart. I tried to take care of him the way he'd taken care of Mom, but I was only 17 and dealing with my own overwhelming loss. I learned to do the grocery shopping, pay bills, and manage household tasks that Mom had always handled. The adult responsibilities were daunting, but they also gave me something to focus on besides my grief. Our house felt enormous and empty without Mom's presence. Dad would sometimes forget and set 3 places at the dinner table, then stare at the extra plate with confusion and sadness. We'd find ourselves starting to tell Mom about our days before remembering she wasn't there to listen. The silence where her laughter used to be was deafening. About a year after Mom died, Dad started dating again. I was initially resistant to the idea. It felt like a betrayal of Mom's memory. But I could see how lonely he was, rattling around our house filled with memories. He'd lost weight, rarely smiled, and seemed to be going through the motions of living rather than actually engaging with life. When he told me he'd met someone at a grief support group, I tried to be supportive. "Her name is Victoria," he said nervously, "and she's been through something similar. Lost her first husband to cancer a few years ago. I think you'd like her." He seemed almost apologetic, as if he needed my permission to move forward with his life. When he introduced me to Victoria, I made a genuine effort to be welcoming. Victoria was an interior designer from a wealthy family in West Hills, Portland's most exclusive neighborhood where houses regularly sold for millions of dollars. She was sophisticated and well-dressed, always perfectly put together in a way that made me suddenly aware of my own casual clothes and unstyled hair. Victoria had this polished elegance that Mom had never possessed or desired. Where Mom had been warm and approachable, Victoria was cool and composed. Where Mom had laughed loudly and hugged frequently, Victoria smiled carefully and maintained physical distance. They were complete opposites, which perhaps was exactly what Dad thought he needed. Victoria had been married before to Dr. Harrison Wells, a prominent cardiac surgeon at OHSU who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. She lived in his former house, a massive colonial in West Hills with professionally landscaped grounds and rooms that looked like magazine spreads. She spoke casually about charity galas, country club events, and vacation homes in ways that made it clear she came from a completely different world than we did. She had 2 children from her marriage to Dr. Wells. Her son Trevor was 19, confident and handsome in the way that comes from never doubting your place in the world. He was planning to attend Stanford University in the fall, following in his late father's footsteps toward a career in medicine. Trevor had this easy charm and natural leadership that made him popular with everyone he met. Her daughter Madison was 17 like me, but we couldn't have been more different. Where I was studious and reserved, Madison was social and outgoing, comfortable in expensive clothes and exclusive social circles that I'd never encountered. She attended Catlin Gable, an elite private school where tuition cost more per year than many people earned. Madison spoke fluent French, played competitive tennis, and spent summers at prestigious camps or traveling abroad. Both Trevor and Madison were polite to me, but clearly saw me as an outsider. They had inside jokes, shared references to places and experiences I'd never had, and a casual assumption of privilege that made me feel like I was from another planet. They weren't mean, exactly, just indifferent, which somehow felt worse than outright hostility. Dad and Victoria's relationship moved quickly, faster than seemed wise for 2 people who had both experienced significant losses. They were engaged within 6 months of meeting and married in a lavish ceremony at Victoria's family's country club, just 10 months after their first date. The speed made me nervous, but Dad seemed happier than he'd been since Mom died, and I didn't want to be the one to question his newfound joy. The wedding was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The country club was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, with uniformed staff serving champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. I felt uncomfortable throughout the ceremony, surrounded by people in designer clothes discussing vacation homes in Aspen and investment portfolios. Women wore jewellery that probably cost more than our old house, and men talked about golf handicaps and yacht purchases, as if these were normal topics of conversation. I wore a dress that Victoria had selected for me, expensive but somehow wrong for my body type and personality. The colour washed me out, and the style made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. Victoria had insisted on professional hair and makeup for me, but the result looked artificial and foreign when I saw myself in the mirror. During the reception, I sat at the family table feeling like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. The conversations swirled around private schools, European tours and business deals I couldn't understand. When people asked about my plans after high school, I mentioned community college, and the polite smiles that followed made it clear this was not the expected answer in this crowd. After the wedding, we moved into Victoria's spacious house in West Hills, leaving behind the modest craftsman where I'd grown up. Dad seemed excited about the upgrade. The house had 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and a view of the city that was genuinely breathtaking. But I felt lost in the expanse of marble and granite, missing the creaky floors and built-in bookshelves of our old home. My modest belongings looked completely out of place in the professionally decorated rooms with their coordinated colour schemes and expensive artwork. Everything had been chosen by a designer for maximum visual impact rather than comfort or personal meaning. The furniture was beautiful, but not inviting, the kind of chairs you admired rather than relaxed in. Victoria gave me a bedroom that was beautiful but felt sterile compared to my cosy yellow room in our old house. Everything was beige and cream, colours chosen for their sophistication rather than warmth. The room had a sitting area, walk-in closet, and private bathroom that was larger than my entire old bedroom, but it felt like a hotel room rather than a personal space. Initially, Victoria made efforts to include me in family activities and decisions. She took me shopping for clothes that would fit better with our family's image, replacing my casual jeans and t-shirts with more expensive pieces that looked appropriate for the social circles we now moved in. She enrolled me in a private school where Trevor and Madison had attended, claiming it would provide better college preparation. The monthly tuition at Portland Academy was more than my dad had earned in some entire months at his old job, but Victoria assured him it was an investment in my future. Jessica needs to be prepared for the opportunities she'll have as part of this family, she explained. The connections she makes at Portland Academy will serve her well throughout her life. The private school environment was a complete shock to my system. My public school classmates had come from diverse backgrounds, some wealthy, some struggling, most somewhere in between. But at Portland Academy, everyone seemed to have trust funds and European vacation stories. The parking lot was filled with luxury cars, and casual conversation revolved around spring break trips to Cabo and summer internships at family businesses. I struggled to fit in, feeling constantly aware of my second-hand clothes and lack of sophisticated experiences. Even with Victoria's shopping assistance, I couldn't quite achieve the effortless elegance that came naturally to my classmates. My grades remained strong. Academics had always been my strength, but socially I was adrift in a world I didn't understand. The other students weren't necessarily unkind, but they had no frame of reference for someone like me. When they talked about family ski trips to Switzerland or internships at their parents' law firms, I had nothing to contribute. When they complained about their housekeepers or personal trainers, I couldn't relate to having such services. I felt like I was speaking a different language, even though we all technically spoke English. Victoria began making subtle changes to our household routines and family dynamics. The casual Friday movie nights that Dad and I had treasured were replaced with dinner parties for Victoria's business associates and social circle. Our comfortable family traditions were gradually eliminated in favour of more elegant alternatives that showcased Victoria's sophisticated tastes and social status. The dining room, which we'd rarely used in our old house, became the centre of elaborate dinner parties featuring multiple courses, professional catering, and guest lists that read like a who's who of Portland society. Dad seemed to enjoy these events, basking in the social acceptance and cultural sophistication he'd never experienced before. Our simple family traditions disappeared one by one. Christmas morning, which had always been intimate and focused on family time, became a large gathering with Victoria's extended family and social circle. The homemade stockings Mom had sewn were replaced with expensive ones from Nordstrom. Dad's treasure hunts were deemed too childish and replaced with a more formal gift exchange. Dad seemed happy with his new life, genuinely enjoying the financial security and social status that came with marrying into Victoria's family. He started playing golf at the country club, joining a men's investment group, and discussing stock market strategies, topics that had never interested him before. I watched him transform into someone I barely recognised, trading his comfortable jeans and flannel shirts for polo shirts and khakis that Victoria selected for him. He began using phrases like our portfolio and market volatility, speaking with newfound confidence about financial matters he'd never mentioned before. Victoria encouraged this transformation, praising his business acumen and introducing him to potential clients from her social circle. Dad's accounting practice expanded rapidly, with referrals from country club members who needed someone they could trust with their complex financial situations. The real problems began during my senior year of high school. Victoria started making subtle comments about college expenses and the burden of supporting another family's child. The comments were always made when Dad wasn't present, delivered with a sweet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Michael has already sacrificed so much for Jessica's education, she would say during family discussions about the future. Perhaps it's time for her to take more responsibility for her own path forward. Independence is such an important quality to develop at her age. When I brought up my college applications and mentioned the schools I was interested in attending, Victoria suggested I consider community college or in-state schools to minimise costs. This was confusing because my grades were excellent. I was in the top 10% of my class at Portland Academy, and I'd been accepted to several prestigious universities, including some on the East Coast. Dad seemed torn between supporting my ambitions and keeping peace with his new wife. During private conversations, he would encourage my academic goals and express pride in my achievements. But when Victoria was present, he would nod along with her suggestions about being practical and responsible about educational expenses. Jessica, you have to understand that our financial situation has changed, Dad explained one evening when I pressed him about college funding. Victoria's children have their own educational expenses, and we need to be fair to everyone in the family. Trevor's medical school applications are extremely expensive, and Madison will need support for her art studies in Europe. This was the first time I learned that most of my original college fund had been depleted during Mom's illness. What remained wouldn't cover the costs of the prestigious universities I'd hoped to attend. Victoria suggested I take a gap year to work and save money, a reasonable-sounding proposal that I later realised was designed to derail my college plans entirely. During this time, I learned that Grandma Patricia had become seriously ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh Seattle winter. The family was worried about her recovery, and I desperately wanted to visit her in the hospital, but Victoria discouraged the trip, claiming it would be too disruptive to my school schedule during senior year. "Your grandmother needs rest and medical care right now," Victoria explained with apparent concern. "A visit from an energetic teenager might be too much stimulation for someone in her condition. We'll send flowers and cards to let her know we're thinking of her." I now realised she was already planning to isolate me from family members who might advocate for my interests or offer alternative perspectives on my situation. Grandma Patricia had always been protective of me and might have questioned why I wasn't being supported in my college ambitions despite the family's new wealth. Instead of visiting, I was only allowed to send brief cards and make short phone calls to check on Grandma Patricia's recovery. During these limited conversations, she seemed concerned about my situation and asked detailed questions about my college plans and future goals. I was honest about the financial challenges we were facing, and she seemed troubled by what I told her. "Don't worry about money for college, sweetheart," she told me during one of our last phone conversations. "Smart girls like you always find a way to get the education they deserve. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places." At the time, I thought she was just trying to comfort me, but her words would prove more prophetic than I could have imagined. Grandma Patricia recovered from her illness, but the experience made her reconsider her estate planning. She started asking more specific questions about my relationship with Victoria and Dad, and whether I felt supported in my academic goals. Her questions were gentle but persistent, and I sensed she was picking up on dynamics that I was trying hard to hide. 2 weeks before my high school graduation, Grandma Patricia suffered a massive heart attack while working in her garden. She was found by a neighbour and rushed to Harborview Medical Centre, but died before I could get to Seattle to see her. I was devastated by the loss of the person who had been my strongest supporter and advocate throughout my childhood. The funeral was held in Seattle at a beautiful old church near her neighbourhood. I noticed Victoria seemed particularly interested in the legal proceedings and discussions about Grandma Patricia's estate, asking detailed questions about the probate process and timeline for settling affairs. She positioned herself as a concerned family member offering to help with practical matters, but there was something calculating about her attention to the financial details. After graduation, Victoria announced that I needed to contribute more significantly to household expenses if I planned to continue living in their home. She framed this as a character-building experience that would teach me responsibility and work ethic before college. "Jessica needs to understand the value of hard work," Victoria explained to Dad. "Living at home rent-free while pursuing expensive education plans isn't realistic preparation for adult life. A full-time job would be much more valuable than rushing into college without proper life experience." Dad supported Victoria's position, seemingly convinced by her arguments about responsibility and maturity. "Look at all the entrepreneurs who dropped out of school," he said, apparently forgetting that most of those stories involved people who left college to pursue existing opportunities, not people who never had the chance to attend in the first place. I found a job at Powell's Books, Portland's famous independent bookstore, working full-time in the rare books section. The work was interesting and the co-workers were kind, but the wages were barely above minimum wage. I began contributing to household expenses as requested, handing over a significant portion of my paycheck each month for rent, groceries, and utilities. However, I soon discovered that my contributions were being used to fund Madison's college expenses and Trevor's graduate school plans. Madison was attending art school in Paris at a cost of over $60,000 per year, while Trevor's medical school tuition at OHSU was nearly as expensive. When I questioned this arrangement, Victoria became defensive and condescending. "My children are pursuing careers that will benefit society," she explained with barely concealed irritation. "Trevor will be a doctor saving lives, and Madison's artistic talents deserve development. These are investments in the future, not frivolous expenses like partying at some expensive liberal arts college." She made it clear that her children's needs took priority because they were real family, while I was essentially a charity case who should be grateful for any support at all. The message was delivered with a sweet smile, but the meaning was unmistakable. I would never be considered an equal member of this family. The emotional abuse escalated throughout that year, becoming more sophisticated and systematic. Victoria would compare me unfavourably to her own children, pointing out their achievements while dismissing my accomplishments. When I received recognition at work or praise from customers for my knowledge of literature, she would minimise these successes or find fault with my performance. "It's nice that you're keeping busy at the bookstore," she would say with a patronising smile, "but Trevor just got accepted to his residency programme at Johns Hopkins. Real achievement requires real ambition, not just showing up to a retail job." She began charging me rent for my bedroom and requiring me to pay for my own groceries, effectively treating me as a tenant rather than a family member. The rent was set high enough to consume most of my earnings, leaving me with barely enough money for basic necessities like clothes and personal items. Dad seemed oblivious to these dynamics, or perhaps he chose not to see them. When I tried to discuss the situation with him, Victoria would smoothly interrupt with reasonable-sounding explanations that made me appear ungrateful or demanding. She was incredibly skilled at manipulating conversations to make herself look generous and me look selfish. "I'm trying to teach Jessica important life skills," she would explain to Dad when I complained about the financial arrangements. "She needs to learn that nothing in life is free, and that privilege comes with responsibility. I wish someone had taught me these lessons when I was her age." By my 19th birthday, I felt completely isolated in what had once been my family. The bookstore job provided some independence and intellectual stimulation, but the wages weren't enough to afford my own apartment in Portland's increasingly expensive housing market. I was effectively trapped in a household where I was tolerated rather than loved, working to subsidize the education of stepchildren who had never accepted me as family. My relationship with Dad deteriorated as Victoria's influence grew stronger. She was subtle but persistent in creating distance between us, scheduling family activities during times when Dad and I might have had private conversations, or interrupting whenever we seemed to be connecting. She positioned herself as the expert on family dynamics, offering advice about my difficult phase and the challenges of integrating families. The isolation was profound and demoralizing. I had lost touch with most of my friends from public school when I transferred to Portland Academy, and the friendships I'd made there had been superficial connections based on shared classes rather than genuine compatibility. My work friends were kind but much older, and I was embarrassed to share the details of my family situation. During this period, I started receiving mail addressed to me from a law firm in Seattle. The first few letters arrived while I was at work, and when I asked about them, Victoria said she had handled them. Apparently they were solicitations from attorneys trying to drum up business, nothing important enough to bother with. But the letters kept coming, and I became curious about their contents. One day I arrived home early from work due to a family emergency at the bookstore and found Victoria in her home office with several opened letters spread across her desk. When she saw me, she quickly gathered the papers, but not before I glimpsed the letterhead and my name clearly printed on the envelopes. The final confrontation came when I discovered Victoria had been systematically intercepting mail from Grandma Patricia's estate attorney. Hidden in Victoria's home office, which I was normally forbidden to enter, I found several unopened letters addressed to me from the law firm of Thornton and Associates in Seattle. When I confronted her about this discovery, she didn't even seem surprised that I had found them. Instead, she launched into a prepared explanation about protecting me from legal complications and family burdens that I was too young to handle properly. "These estate matters are incredibly complex," she said, with the same patronizing tone she used when explaining why I couldn't afford college. "I was planning to handle everything on your behalf, make sure all the paperwork was filed correctly, and the assets were managed properly. You should be thanking me for taking care of these tedious details." I demanded the letters and discovered that Grandma Patricia had left me a substantial inheritance, including her Victorian house and a significant investment portfolio. The lawyer's letters were requesting my contact information to discuss the inheritance and arrange for the transfer of assets. Victoria had been concealing this information for nearly 8 months, effectively stealing my inheritance by preventing me from claiming it. When I showed the letters to Dad, Victoria immediately went into damage control mode. She claimed she had been trying to spare me the burden of managing complex financial matters at such a young age, and that she planned to oversee the inheritance until I was more mature and experienced. "Jessica has no experience with investments or property management," she explained to Dad with apparent concern for my welfare. "She could lose everything through poor decisions or predatory advisors. I was protecting her interests by handling the legal aspects until she's ready for such responsibilities." She suggested that the inheritance should be managed by the family collectively, with her overseeing the investments for my benefit while ensuring I received appropriate guidance about financial planning. It all sounded very reasonable when she explained it, except for the small detail that she had never asked for my permission or even informed me that there was an inheritance to manage. I realised that Victoria had been planning to gain control of my inheritance, just as she had gained control of every other aspect of my life. The timing of her decision to charge me rent, her discouragement of my college plans, her isolation of me from other family members, it had all been part of a systematic plan to make me financially dependent, while she positioned herself to control any assets that came my way. For the first time since Mom's death, I saw a flicker of my old dad when I explained what had been happening. "Victoria, this is Jessica's inheritance from her grandmother. She has every right to handle it herself," he said with more firmness than I'd heard from him in years. But even as he spoke, I could see him wavering under Victoria's disapproving glare and calm counter-arguments. That night, I called the law firm in Seattle and spoke with Margaret Thornton, the attorney handling Grandma Patricia's estate. She was relieved to finally reach me directly, having been concerned about the lack of response to her letters over the past months. We arranged to meet the following week in Seattle to discuss the inheritance and begin the transfer process. Victoria was furious when she learned about my plans to meet with the attorney independently. She accused me of being secretive and disrespectful, claiming that I should have consulted the family before making any decisions about such important matters. "This kind of impulsive behaviour is exactly why you're not ready to handle serious financial responsibilities," she told me with ice in her voice. "But if you insist on acting independently while living in my house, perhaps it's time to reconsider those living arrangements." She threatened to charge me additional rent and impose new restrictions if I insisted on acting independently while benefiting from family support. The threat was clear: submit to her control or face immediate eviction. The meeting with Margaret Thornton was a complete revelation. Grandma Patricia had left me not only her house and investment portfolio, but also a detailed letter explaining her concerns about my situation. She had observed Victoria's behaviour during family gatherings and suspected that I might need financial independence to escape what she recognised as an emotionally abusive situation. "Your grandmother was an extremely perceptive woman," Margaret explained as we sat in her elegant office overlooking Elliott Bay. "She specifically structured this inheritance to prevent anyone else from controlling or accessing these assets. She wanted to ensure that you would have the resources to pursue your education and build an independent life, regardless of what happened with your father's new marriage. The inheritance was substantial enough to cover my college expenses, purchase a modest home, and provide financial security well into my adult life. Grandma Patricia had also included specific instructions about educational goals, encouraging me to pursue higher education and consider law school if I was interested in following her path as a property investor and business owner. But more than the money, what moved me to tears was Grandma Patricia's letter. Written in her careful handwriting, it revealed that she had been worried about me from the moment Dad married Victoria. She had noticed how Victoria treated me differently when Dad wasn't watching, how my enthusiasm and confidence had dimmed during family gatherings, how my college plans had become increasingly uncertain despite my strong academic performance. "My dear Jessica," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am no longer able to protect you directly. But I hope these resources will give you the independence you need to protect yourself. I have watched Victoria with you, and I recognise the signs of someone who sees you as a threat to her control over your father and his resources. She will try to make you small and dependent, to convince you that you have no options and no value beyond what she chooses to grant you. This inheritance is proof that you are valued, that your future matters, and that you have the power to make your own choices." Returning to Portland with this knowledge felt like carrying a powerful secret. I had the resources to escape my situation, but I needed to plan carefully to avoid retaliation from Victoria. I began researching colleges with strong business programs, looking at apartments near various universities, and consulting with financial advisors about managing my new assets responsibly. Victoria sensed that something had changed in my demeanour. I was no longer as deferential or anxious about her approval, and she became increasingly controlling in response. She required detailed explanations of my whereabouts and activities, monitored my phone calls, and searched my room regularly under the guise of housekeeping. She suggested that I should transfer my inheritance to a family trust that she would manage, claiming this would provide better investment returns and tax advantages. When I politely declined, she became more aggressive in her manipulation tactics. "You're being incredibly naive about these financial matters," she warned. "Young people who come into money suddenly almost always lose it through poor decisions. I'm trying to protect you from making mistakes that will haunt you for the rest of your life." When I continued to resist her suggestions, the mask finally came off completely. Victoria accused me of being ungrateful and selfish, forgetting all the sacrifices the family had made for me. She threatened to evict me immediately if I didn't agree to her financial management proposal, apparently believing she could force my compliance through intimidation. "You have no idea how good you've had it living in this house," she said with venom I'd never heard before. "Any other family would have sent you to foster care after your father remarried. Instead, we've provided you with opportunities and support that you clearly don't appreciate. If you can't show proper gratitude and respect, perhaps you should find somewhere else to live." Instead of backing down, I moved out the next day. I used a small portion of my inheritance to rent a furnished apartment near Portland State University and enrolled in community college classes to begin rebuilding my academic momentum. Victoria was shocked that I actually had the resources to leave, having underestimated both my inheritance and my determination to escape her control. Dad was caught in the middle of this conflict, torn between his wife's anger and his daughter's newfound independence. He attempted to mediate between us, but Victoria made it clear that supporting my decisions would be viewed as a betrayal of their marriage. She painted my departure as an act of rebellion and ingratitude, claiming that I had been manipulated by greedy attorneys who wanted to control my inheritance. Sadly, Dad chose his wife over his daughter, a decision that ended our relationship for several years. The last conversation we had before I moved out was painful and disappointing. He accused me of being influenced by outside forces and suggested that I was making a mistake that would ruin my life. "Victoria has been nothing but generous to you," he said with frustration and sadness. "She didn't have to welcome you into her family, but she did, and this is how you repay her kindness, by believing strangers over the people who love you?" Living independently for the first time was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had to learn basic adult skills like managing utilities, grocery shopping efficiently, and budgeting for monthly expenses. But I also experienced the joy of making my own decisions without seeking anyone's approval or enduring criticism for my choices. My apartment was small, but entirely mine. I could decorate it with colours I loved, buy furniture that was comfortable rather than impressive, and establish routines that suited my personality and needs. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe fully and be myself, without constantly monitoring my behaviour for signs of disapproval. Community college provided a fresh start academically. My professors recognised my potential and encouraged me to transfer to a 4-year university as soon as possible. I thrived in the classroom environment, finally free from the constant stress and negativity that had characterised my home life. The courses were challenging but manageable, and I discovered a talent for economics and business that I'd never had the opportunity to explore. My professors were impressed by my work ethic and analytical skills, often encouraging me to pursue more advanced opportunities. After completing my associate degree with honours, I transferred to Portland State University to study business administration with a focus on real estate investment, inspired by Grandma Patricia's success in that field. The inheritance allowed me to attend school full-time without working, giving me the opportunity to focus entirely on my education for the first time in years. College life was a revelation. I made genuine friends who appreciated my personality and values without judging my background or family situation. I joined study groups, participated in campus activities, and discovered talents and interests that had been suppressed during my years in Victoria's household. Margaret Thornton became an unofficial mentor, teaching me about property investment and financial management through regular phone conversations and occasional visits to Seattle. She helped me understand Grandma Patricia's investment strategies and encouraged me to consider law school after completing my undergraduate degree. "Your grandmother saw potential in you that goes far beyond managing money," Margaret told me during one of our mentoring sessions. "She believed you had the intelligence and determination to build something significant with your life. This inheritance isn't just about financial security, it's about giving you the foundation to make a real impact in the world." During my junior year at PSU, I received an unexpected phone call from Dad. Victoria had filed for divorce after discovering that he had been secretly sending me money for my birthday and Christmas, violating her prohibition on family contact. The divorce proceedings revealed that Victoria had been systematically isolating Dad from his extended family and controlling all financial decisions throughout their marriage. Dad was devastated by the divorce, but also seemed relieved to escape Victoria's control. He reached out tentatively, hoping to rebuild our relationship while respecting the independence I had established. Our reconciliation was gradual and careful, built on honest conversations about the past and realistic expectations for the future. "I was so lost after your mother died," he admitted during one of our first meetings in years. "Victoria seemed to have all the answers, and I was grateful to have someone take charge when I couldn't think clearly. But I should have protected you better. I should have seen what was happening." I learned that Trevor had dropped out of Stanford after developing a serious gambling problem, and Madison had been arrested for drug possession during her sophomore year at USC. Victoria's perfect children had struggled with the pressure of maintaining their facade, just as I had struggled with being excluded from it. Trevor had apparently accumulated massive debts from online gambling and had been caught stealing from his dorm mates to fund his addiction. Madison's arrest had been the result of a drug deal gone wrong in a USC dorm room, leading to her expulsion and a criminal record that would impact her future opportunities. My relationship with Dad slowly improved as we both acknowledged the mistakes and misunderstandings that had driven us apart. He never fully apologized for choosing Victoria over me, but he expressed genuine remorse for not recognizing how badly I was being treated. We established new boundaries and traditions that honored our shared past while accepting our changed relationship. I graduated summa cum laude from Portland State and was accepted to several law schools. Following Margaret's advice and Grandma Patricia's encouragement, I enrolled at the University of Oregon School of Law, planning to specialize in estate planning and family law to help other people navigate similar situations. Law school was challenging but deeply rewarding, particularly the courses on family law and fiduciary responsibilities. My personal experiences gave me unique insights into how financial control can be used as a tool of abuse and how legal protections can be circumvented by manipulative individuals. Professors often commented on the depth of understanding I brought to case studies involving family conflicts and inheritance disputes. During my first year, I wrote a law review article about the intersection of domestic abuse and financial control, drawing on both academic research and carefully anonymized personal observations. The article was published and received attention from family law practitioners who recognized the need for better legal protections for vulnerable family members. My clinical work focused on representing low-income clients in family court, helping people navigate divorces, custody disputes, and inheritance conflicts. Each case reminded me of my own experience and motivated me to provide the advocacy I wish I had needed during my darkest years. Many clients were surprised by how well I understood their situations, but I was careful not to let my personal history overshadow their unique circumstances. During my second year of law school, I learned that Victoria had remarried quickly to another wealthy widower with adult children. According to mutual acquaintances, she was already causing conflict in that household, attempting to isolate her new husband from his family while positioning her own children as primary beneficiaries of his estate. Her new husband, Robert Fitzgerald, was a retired tech executive whose first wife had died of breast cancer 2 years earlier. He had 3 adult children who were successful professionals in their own right, but Victoria was apparently using the same tactics she had employed with Dad, gradually undermining family relationship swaps while presenting herself as the voice of reason and stability. This pattern confirmed what I had always suspected. Victoria was a professional manipulator who targeted vulnerable widowed men with assets she could control. Her interest in Dad had never been about love or companionship, but about gaining access to his resources and whatever inheritance I might eventually receive. I graduated from law school with honours and passed the Oregon bar exam on my first attempt. Margaret Thornton offered me a position at her firm in Seattle, specialising in estate planning and family conflict resolution. The opportunity to work with someone who had been such an important mentor was too good to refuse. Moving to Seattle felt like coming home in a way. I bought a small house near Grandma Patricia's Victorian mansion, which I had decided to keep as a rental property rather than sell. The neighbourhood had changed over the years, but still retained the character that had made it special during my childhood visits. My legal career has been both professionally successful and personally healing. I help families create estate plans that protect vulnerable members from exploitation, and I represent individuals who are fighting to recover inheritances that have been misappropriated by trustees or family members. One of my most memorable cases involved a young man whose stepmother had convinced his dying father to change his will, leaving everything to her children instead of him. The case took 2 years to resolve, but we ultimately proved that the stepmother had exercised undue influence over her husband during his final illness. Winning that case felt like justice not just for my client, but for everyone who had been systematically erased from their own families. Each case reminds me of my own experience and motivates me to provide the advocacy I wish I had available during my darkest years. Many clients are surprised by how well I understand their situations, the subtle manipulation, the gradual isolation, the way financial control becomes emotional control. But I'm careful not to let my personal history overshadow their unique circumstances. Dad and I have developed a solid, if somewhat formal, relationship as adults. He remarried a few years ago to a kind woman named Carol, who teaches middle school science and has no interest in controlling anyone's finances or relationships. Carol encourages our family connection, and seems genuinely happy that Dad has reconnected with his daughter. I was genuinely happy to attend their wedding, a small, intimate ceremony at a Portland park that felt authentic and joyful in a way that Dad's wedding to Victoria never had. Carol welcomed me warmly into their lives, asking about my work and interests with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Dad seems lighter now, more like the person he was before Mom died. He's returned to many of his old interests and has rekindled relationships with extended family members that Victoria had discouraged. He still feels guilty about the years we lost, but we've both learned to focus on building something positive moving forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes. Victoria occasionally attempts to reconnect through social media or mutual acquaintances, apparently hoping to gain access to the inheritance she was never able to control. Her messages are always carefully crafted to sound concerned and family-oriented, but I maintain strict boundaries with her and her children. I learned through the Portland social network that Trevor never recovered from his gambling addiction and has been in and out of rehabilitation programs for years. Madison eventually finished college, but struggled with substance abuse issues that stemmed from the pressure to maintain her mother's perfect image. Both of Victoria's children seem to have paid a heavy price for their mother's manipulative behaviour. The Victorian house Grandma Patricia left me has become my primary residence after I renovated it with modern amenities while maintaining its historic character. The house feels like a connection to the woman who saved my future through her foresight and generosity. I've restored the garden where Grandma Patricia taught me to plant flowers, and it has become my sanctuary, a place where I feel connected to her wisdom and love. Every spring, I plant the same varieties of flowers we grew together: lavender, roses, and the heirloom tomatoes she was so proud of. The physical work of gardening helps me process difficult cases and maintain perspective on what really matters in life. My investment portfolio has grown substantially under careful management, providing financial security that extends far beyond my immediate needs. Following Grandma Patricia's example, I've diversified into real estate investments, purchasing and renovating properties in up-and-coming Seattle neighborhoods. I've also established a scholarship fund for students who are aging out of foster care or dealing with family conflicts that threaten their educational opportunities. The fund provides not just financial support, but also mentoring and legal assistance for young people navigating complex family situations. Working with scholarship recipients has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my current life. Many of these young people face challenges similar to what I experienced. Family members who don't support their educational goals, financial manipulation, emotional abuse disguised as concern. Being able to provide both practical support and emotional validation feels like the best possible use of the resources Grandma Patricia provided. One scholarship recipient, Maria, had been living in her car while attending community college after her stepfather kicked her out for refusing to drop out and get a job to support his gambling habit. Helping her navigate the legal system to claim support she was entitled to, and watching her graduate with honours from nursing school, reminded me why this work matters so much. Another student, David, had been prevented from accessing his college fund by a guardian who claimed the money needed to be saved for more practical purposes. We were able to prove financial mismanagement and get him the resources he needed to attend engineering school. These victories feel personal in a way that's both professionally fulfilling and emotionally healing. Looking back on my journey from that isolated teenager in Victoria's house to my current life as an independent professional, I'm struck by how dramatically circumstances can change when the right resources and support become available. Grandma Patricia's inheritance provided more than money. It gave me options and the power to make choices about my own life. The experience taught me valuable lessons about the intersection of family, money, and power. I learned that legal family relationships don't guarantee love or loyalty, and that financial dependence can make people vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. I also learned that healing from family trauma is possible when you have the resources and support to build a new life. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that resilience isn't about enduring abuse or accepting poor treatment in the name of family loyalty. Real resilience is about recognizing when a situation is harmful and having the courage to leave, even when that means disappointing people who claim to love you. If I could speak to my 19-year-old self, struggling in that bookstore job and feeling trapped in Victoria's house, I would tell her to hold on just a little longer. Sometimes rescue comes from unexpected places, and sometimes the people who seem most powerless actually have more strength and resources than anyone realizes. I would tell her that the adults who claim to know what's best for her might actually be serving their own interests, and it's okay to trust her own instincts about what feels wrong. I would remind her that her mother's love and her grandmother's wisdom live on in her, giving her strength she doesn't even know she possesses yet. My story isn't unique in its broad outlines. Many people deal with stepfamilies that don't accept them, financial manipulation by trusted individuals, and the challenge of building independent lives after family relationships break down. What made the difference for me was having someone who recognized the danger I was in and took concrete steps to protect my future. Grandma Patricia's foresight in structuring my inheritance to prevent outside control literally saved my life. Without those resources, I might have remained trapped in Victoria's household, gradually worn down until I accepted a diminished version of the life I had once dreamed of. Today, I use my legal skills to help other people navigate similar situations, and I use my financial resources to support young people who need advocates and opportunities. Grandma Patricia's legacy lives on not just in the inheritance she left me, but in the lives I'm able to touch through the security and education her foresight provided. The best revenge against people who try to steal your future is building a life so successful and fulfilling that their attempts to harm you become irrelevant. Victoria thought she could control my destiny by controlling my resources, but she underestimated both my grandmother's wisdom and my own determination to succeed. I hope anyone reading this who is dealing with family manipulation or financial abuse will remember that situations can change. Help can come from unexpected sources, and your future belongs to you regardless of what other people try to take away. Your circumstances don't define your potential, and the people who try to diminish you today may find themselves completely irrelevant to your success tomorrow. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you exactly how not to treat other people. The legal profession has given me tools to help others in similar situations, but it has also provided intellectual satisfaction and professional recognition that I never could have achieved without the educational opportunities my inheritance made possible. I've argued cases before the Washington State Supreme Court, published articles in prestigious law journals, and been invited to speak at conferences about family law and financial abuse. But beyond professional success, I've built a life filled with genuine relationships, meaningful work, and personal fulfillment. I have friends who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. I have colleagues who respect my expertise and judgment. I have clients who trust me to advocate for their interests with intelligence and compassion. Every morning when I wake up in Grandma Patricia's house, surrounded by the garden we planted together and the books we read together, I feel grateful for the circuitous path that brought me here. The pain of losing my parents, the betrayal by Victoria, the years of struggle and uncertainty, all of it led to this life that I might never have discovered otherwise. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Grandma Patricia hadn't structured my inheritance so carefully, or if I hadn't found the courage to leave Victoria's house, or if Margaret Thornton hadn't been such a skilled and compassionate attorney. But dwelling on alternative scenarios isn't productive. What matters is that help was available when I needed it most, and I was smart enough to accept it, despite the risks. The relationships I've built since leaving Victoria's household are based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or convenience. My friend Sarah, whom I met in law school, often comments on how different I am from the anxious, uncertain person she first knew. "You've grown into yourself," she told me recently. "You're comfortable in your own skin in a way that's really beautiful to see." That comfort didn't come easily or quickly. Years of therapy helped me understand the patterns of manipulation and control that had shaped my adolescence. Dr. Jennifer Wong, my therapist throughout law school, helped me recognize that the hypervigilance and some people-pleasing behaviors that had helped me survive Victoria's household were no longer necessary or helpful in my adult relationships. Learning to trust my own judgment again was particularly challenging. Victoria had been so skilled at making me doubt my perceptions and question my reactions that I struggled for years to believe in my own instincts. Therapy helped me understand that gaslighting, the systematic undermining of someone's reality, is a common tactic used by emotional abusers. The process of healing from family trauma while building a demanding career was exhausting, but ultimately transformative. Each legal victory for a client facing similar circumstances felt like a small victory for the teenager who had felt so powerless in Victoria's house. My romantic relationships have been shaped by my experiences as well. I'm drawn to partners who value independence and respect boundaries, who see strength rather than damage in my complicated family history. My current boyfriend, Alex, is a social worker who understands the dynamics of family dysfunction from his own professional experience. "You're one of the strongest people I know," he told me recently, Not because you survived what happened to you, but because you used it to build something meaningful for other people. That perspective, seeing my experiences as a source of strength rather than limitation, has been crucial to my ongoing healing. The financial security provided by my inheritance has allowed me to take cases based on their merit rather than their profitability. I've represented clients pro bono when their situations resonated with my own experience, and I've been able to turn down cases that felt ethically questionable even when they would have been lucrative. This freedom has made my legal practice more fulfilling and impactful than it could have been otherwise. I specialise in cases involving vulnerable family members, elder abuse and inheritance disputes, areas where my personal experience provides valuable insight but also requires careful emotional management. One case that particularly resonated with me involved an elderly woman whose stepchildren had convinced her to change her will after her husband died, leaving everything to them instead of her biological children. The stepchildren had systematically isolated her from her own family, convincing her that her children were only interested in her money. Working on that case brought back memories of watching Victoria manipulate Dad, but it also allowed me to use my understanding of those dynamics to build a stronger legal strategy. We were able to prove undue influence and restore the woman's original estate plan, reuniting her with children she had been convinced didn't love her. The professional recognition I've received for my work in family law has been gratifying, but not as important as the personal satisfaction of knowing I'm making a difference. Last year, I was named one of Seattle's 40 under 40 rising professionals, and I've been invited to join the board of a non-profit organisation that provides legal services to domestic violence survivors. These opportunities have expanded my impact beyond individual cases to systemic change. I've worked with legislators to strengthen legal protections for vulnerable family members and testified before state committees about the need for better oversight of trustees and guardians. My scholarship fund has grown to support 20 students per year, each receiving not just financial assistance but also mentoring and legal guidance. Many of these students have gone on to successful careers in fields ranging from medicine to education to law, and several have established their own charitable foundations to help others facing similar challenges. The ripple effects of Grandma Patricia's foresight continue to expand through each life that's been touched by the opportunities her inheritance made possible. In a way, her legacy is multiplying exponentially through the students who've been supported, the clients who've been helped, and the legal precedents that have been established. Victoria's attempts to reconnect have become less frequent over the years, perhaps because she's realised that I'm never going to be the vulnerable teenager she once controlled. Her last message, sent through a mutual acquaintance, claimed she was proud of my success and hoped we could reconcile for the sake of family. The irony of her using family loyalty as a reason for reconciliation wasn't lost on me. This, from the woman who had systematically excluded me from family decisions, charged me rent in my own father's house, and stolen my inheritance. Some relationships are too toxic to salvage, and recognizing that boundary has been an important part of my healing process. Dad and I have talked about Victoria occasionally, usually when he's processing his own guilt about those years. He's come to understand that Victoria targeted him during his most vulnerable period, using his grief and loneliness to gain control over his life and resources. She was like a predator, he said during one of our conversations. She identified men who were isolated and grieving, then positioned herself as the solution to their problems. I was so desperate for someone to take charge when I couldn't think clearly that I handed over control of everything, including my relationship with you. Understanding Victoria's systematic approach has helped both Dad and me make sense of what happened without completely excusing the choices that were made. Dad bears responsibility for not protecting me better, but he was also a victim of manipulation in his own way. The house where I grew up in the Hawthorne district has been torn down and replaced with a modern construction that bears no resemblance to the home where I spent my childhood. Sometimes I drive by the address when I'm visiting Dad, but The new building holds no emotional resonance for me. The real memories live in the relationships and traditions that survived even when the physical space didn't. Grandma Patricia's house, on the other hand, feels more like home to me now than anywhere I've ever lived. I've restored it carefully, maintaining the period details she loved while updating the systems for modern living. The garden has become a place of meditation and reflection where I feel closest to her memory and wisdom. I've kept some of her original furniture and artwork, pieces that tell the story of her travels and achievements. The emerald ring she bought herself after her first real estate success sits in a place of honour on my dresser, a daily reminder that women can create their own security and success. My investment portfolio has grown to include not just traditional assets, but also real estate developments that provide affordable housing for working families. Following Grandma Patricia's example, I look for properties with potential that others might overlook, then work to transform them into communities that serve people who are often underserved by the housing market. These projects combine financial returns with social impact, creating wealth while also addressing important community needs. It's a way of honouring both Grandma Patricia's business acumen and her values of helping others achieve independence and security. The teenage girl who once felt powerless in Victoria's house could never have imagined the life I'm living now. But every choice I've made since leaving that toxic environment has been guided by the lessons Grandma Patricia taught me about independence, self-respect, and the importance of helping others. If you're reading this and recognizing elements of your own family situation, please know that escape is possible, even when it seems impossible. Help may come from unexpected sources, but it often requires the courage to recognize that your current situation is not acceptable and doesn't have to be permanent. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and family scapegoating are more common than most people realize. If you're experiencing these dynamics, document everything you can, seek outside perspective from trusted friends or professionals, and remember that family relationships should be sources of support, not systems of control. The strength you need to change your circumstances may be dormant inside you, waiting for the right opportunity or resources to emerge. Sometimes that strength comes from recognizing that you deserve better treatment than you're receiving, and sometimes it comes from meeting one person who believes in your potential. Has anyone else dealt with stepfamily situations where you felt like an outsider in your own family? Or discovered that someone was hiding important information about inheritances or family assets? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps other people realize they're not alone in dealing with complicated family dynamics. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate isn't linear or easy, but it's possible with the right support and resources. If my story helps even one person recognize that they have options they haven't considered, or encourages someone to seek help when they're feeling trapped, then sharing these painful details will have been worthwhile. Thanks for reading my story. I hope it reminds someone out there that even when things seem hopeless, there might be resources and support available that you don't know about yet. Keep fighting for your future. You deserve better than people who try to steal your dreams. Your story isn't over yet, and the next chapter might be better than you can imagine.